Oke, selamat sore teman-teman. Selamat datang di Extension Course Integrated Arts. Ini pertemuan yang keempat. Selamat datang semua. Mohon maaf sekali lagi untuk keterlambatannya. Kita sudah menunggu setengah jam, tapi it's okay. Sekarang Liesbeth sudah terhubung sama kita di sini. Hello Liesbeth, how are you? Liesbeth, now you're in Den Haag ya, or in Leiden?
Leiden, ya.
In Leiden, ya. So kita akan mendengarkan presentasi hari ini dalam konteks Extension Course Integrated Arts Merangkul Jarak, Meniti Arsip, Masa Lalu dan Sejarah. Ini merupakan edisi perdana dari Extension Course Integrated Arts yang diselenggarakan program Integrated Unpar Universitas Katolik Parahyangan di Bandung. Disajikan dalam rangkaian Wicara, Lokakarya, dan melihat potensi penciptaan artistik sebagai cara lain untuk memaknai masa lalu sekaligus merentang masa depan. Potensi tersebut hadir dalam arsip-arsip foto dan cara kita terhubung dengan dunia yang terekam di dalamnya. Dan salah satu yang kita akan dengarkan hari ini adalah paparan dari Liesbeth Ouwehand. I will introduce you, ya, Liesbeth, ya. Liesbeth Ouwehand is curator of photography at the Royal Collections in The Hague. Previously, she worked as curator of South and Southeast Asian photography at the Leiden University Library and the National Museum of World Cultures. She has worked extensively on the KITLV and photo collection at the library. Her book, sorry for the spelling,
My apologies.
In build photo albums with Netherlands Indie from KITLV Press was published in 2009. She has published articles on topics such as disaster photography and Chinese photographers in Netherlands Indies. So without further ado, Liesbeth, the Zoom is yours.
Thank you. So if you could start with the PowerPoint, that would be great. Yes. And then, can you do full screen, Theo? Yes, thank you. And you could go to the next slide. It's fine. I'm not sure. I'm sure some of you know what the KITLV is, but I'll do a small explanation. It's the Royal Netherlands Institute of Southeast Asian and Caribbean Studies, and the institute is in Leiden. And they used to have a very big library and collection, photo collection and archival collection on the Dutch former colonies, so Suriname and the Caribbean, and also Indonesia. But this whole collection was moved to the University Library in Leiden in 2014. And today I will show you a few examples from the KITLV collection, but also one very beautiful example from the Royal Collections. And the Royal Collections in The Hague is the collection that keeps the collection of the royal family. So that's a very specific and very beautiful collection. When I look at photo albums and photographs, and I've talked to Theo extensively about this, I always look at materiality. And with materiality, and when you look at albums, I mean the album covers, like you see an example here, the captions that you find in an album, and also the photographic processes. So there's different techniques and different kind of prints. So that's all part of the materiality. And I always find that people who compile an album make very, could you go back to the first one, please? Make very conscious choices. And here we see an album which was compiled by Douwes Dekker. And it's more like a scrapbook. And the album contains not just photographs, but also floor plans of houses, letters, and all sorts of things. And the album was compiled in 1949 and between 1949 and 1950. But the photographic content, the photographs were made long before that period. And as you can see, it's a very well structured album. So on the right page, you see the outline of the scrapbook, and it's divided into chapters, which is a rare thing. And the title says Restjes na de zonvloed, which you see on the left part, and that means remnants of the deluge. Could you go to the next one, Mas? Thank you. What we see is photographs which survived the violence of World War II and the War of Independence. But interestingly enough, the captions, which are some of them are quite long, there are a complete break with the images. So the photographs, they show happy moments like you will find in any family album, and even family albums now, you find photographs of happy moments. But the captions, they focus on the violence and the loss of 30 photo albums from the family archive in Waspada. So that's a very interesting, that's why this album struck me actually when I had it in my hands the first time. And it's an album which is very dear to me. So it's the happy moments and the captions that talk about the War of Independence and the violence and the loss of the photo albums. So actually you can say it's a highly autographical object. The remainder of the photographs were taken before the outbreak of World War II. And well, what we see here is a page which is about a trip around the world, and when the Douwes-Dekker family went on furlough in 1920, 1921. So they went back to Europe for just a year, and they made a small trip around the world. So, but the captions tell us something completely different. Could you go to the next slide, please? Oh yes, and I doubled my, and then the next one, yes. So here we see here you see a Dolce Donum. And as I understood from Theo, the house is still there in Bandung, which is quite interesting. So this is the floor plan, which is it's a way to commemorate the house in which they lived and in which they lived very happily between 1925 and 1929. And on the right page, you see a few postcards that he put in the album of Bandung and the surroundings. But of course, the captions tell us a different story. It's about the War of Independence and the loss of his albums. So it's actually a very sad album. Next slide, please. So what's also interesting, so family albums are albums that we have a lot in the KTLV collection. And most of those albums were compiled by Europeans and Indo-Europeans. And they were brought back to the Netherlands when families were moving back here. So that's actually a sort of quite logical reason why you find a lot of European and Indo-European family albums. However, the collection also contains a handful of Indonesian family albums, which is a bit rare, and I'm not sure how some of those albums ended up in the collection through a dealer. But for some of the albums, we don't know how they became part of the collection. And unfortunately, I can't show you any album. Well, I will show you a few album pages. But what I really like about this Japanese family album, you find both snapshots and examples of photographs that were taken by a professional photographer in a studio. And what I really like about this album, there's a lot of performance going on. So on the right, you see a woman taking a telephone call, someone is reading. It's a very staged photograph, and people are performing. And they're showing, as you can, in this case, also modernity, which is so this is a very interesting album. So the next slide, please. And talking about modernity and performances, so this is one of the examples of the professional photographs. And this photo was taken in the studio of Shelan in Yogyakarta. And I'm sure some of you can read Japanese, but the caption says, together with BRM Sujanadi and GRM Suamaji in a prehistoric airplane. And if you go to the next one, which is also, could you, yes, thank you. You see the same airplane again, and it's a slightly different airplane, but it's also an airplane. And it says, the caption says, 5 prisoners escape by airplane. So it's the airplane, of course, in the Ceylon studio was such a pronounced feature, and it gave the visitors to the studio a chance to realize an almost undreamed of journey by air. And in reality, of course, it was something that was just reserved for the happy few. So it was a very nice way to do a performance, to show modernity. And the humorous captions in this example make it clear that the snapshot album was not intended to be viewed in an archive. It was absolutely intended to be viewed in an intimate family sphere. And that's something that we still do with family albums, of course. Next slide, please. So the royal collections, so I'm going to show you something completely different from a materiality point of view. So the royal collections in The Hague, of course, they do contain family albums, but those are family albums, private albums from the royal family. But there were also there's also a lot of gifts to Queen Wilhelmina, for example. And during the colonial era, she was also given various albums, like this very impressive album by a Governor General von Heutz, and he gave it to Wilhelmina in 1904 when he became Governor General. And it's a very impressive box with gold details on it. It's very rich. And the content of the album is, if you could go to the next slide, please. The content of the album contains all photographs of Aceh. So Nieuwenhuis, he was actually based in Padang on West Sumatra, but he was also asked by the government to make photographs in Aceh. So he set up a studio temporarily, and he took all sorts of photographs of views, but also of Achenese people. And the interesting thing is, these photographs are well known, so you will also find them in other collections, but this album was specially made for the Queen. So it's the we say that the cards on which the photos are glued are very nice. They have captions in calligraphic writing because you do something for the Queen, so it should be very nice and very beautiful. And what I really like about this album also is that some of the Achenese are being named. So often, for example, the picture on the right, I didn't know who those people were. I knew the picture because it's also available in the collection of the university library, but I didn't know who they were. And apparently, of course, Nieuwenhuis knew of the people he took a photograph of, and apparently it was documented somewhere. And this is actually quite interesting that we that this album gives us more information than we actually had. So it's a very rich gift, and of course it does make sense that you put in a lot of effort when you make an album for the Queen. So from a materiality point of view, this is something completely incomparable, of course, to a family album, but both of those types of albums are very interesting. So these are just a few examples that I wanted to share. There's more to share if maybe we can do that later on in the discussion. What do you think, Theo?
It's okay if you want to continue.
Yes, okay, then we go to the next slide, and then another, you can skip this one. This is my email if you want to reach me by email. Yes, well, and we can also always, of course, change details later if you want to. So going back to the KITLV collection, this is one of the smallest albums, which of course it doesn't show on this slide, but it's one of the smallest albums that the collection has. It's about this size, and it's something that would fit in one of your pockets. And that's actually, I think, exactly what happened. So this was an album by oh, my apologies, by Mr. Nasruddin. He fought in the TNI during the War of Independence, and he was executed by a Dutch captain. And after his execution, this album was taken. And because of the size, and the album contains, I should tell you, photographs of his friends who were also part of the TNI, and some pantun. And some of the pantun, they all talk about being away from home and being away from your homeland and all sorts of things. So it's a very emotional and very personal album. And the interesting thing about this is, and we can also talk about this was bought by the KITLV from a dealer in 2004. And of course, it's actually very surprising, because I find that at the time, it was a very controversial album, because it was taken from somebody who was being executed. And you can wonder whether the KITLV should have bought this album or not. And it's now part of the university library. So it's something of which I think should probably go back to the family members, the descendants of Nasruddin. But I'm not sure where they are and who they are, but that would be something we can discuss. But the size also tells you, and it's something that I really, really like, is how you use it. So because of the small size, it's something that, you know, if you have a small friend's booklet, it's something that it's so personal. It's something that you will just look in by yourself, and it's not something that you share with a big crowd. So it's totally different from an album that you, for example, have to put on the table, whereas this, you can hold it in your hand and you can just flip through and look at your friends and, well, and write some pantun, which is quite interesting. Next one, please. And this is the last slide? I forgot. Oh no, there's also still something about the content. Yeah. So this is also one of my favorite albums in the collection of KITLV. I always said we have one tiger and we have one crocodile. There is one album which has a cover made of crocodile leather, and there's one album which is made of tiger. And if you could go to the next slide. The interesting thing about this is this album was compiled in the 1930s by a colonial administrator, Mr. Lapré. And Lapré was he was based in Bengkulu, and he was very fond of hunting. So in this album, it's all about the hunt. And the captions are enormous. They're small essays, and the captions give you information about the tiger, whether it's a male or a female tiger, where it was shot, what the tiger did, and all sorts of things. And even when, for example, he has pictures, for example, of his son, which you see on the left, it's also with a tiger. So it's a personal album. You could say it's a family album. I'm not sure how to call this, but everything has to do with hunting, and especially tigers, but there's also banteng and other animals in there. But the tiger is playing a key role, and it's all about the performance. And what I also think is that the cover of the album, so it's not a specially made album, but the Lapré made he covered the original album with tiger, and I'm sure it's one of the tigers that he shot. So that's also a very interesting album from a materiality point of view. And also when you look at the content of the photographs and the captions that are being joined together, it's a very nice story. So this is just, you know, all sorts of things that you might find interesting in the KITLV collection. There's also, of course, other albums, but I thought I should stick to personal albums and some and a gift that was given to Queen Wilhelmina. So that's to show you the differences between all these. I think this is it. For me, this is about it. We can start the discussion.
Okay, thank you, Lisbeth. Okay, this is like super fast and concise presentation for your, I think, long journey with the archive in KTLV, and now is in the Royal Collection. Yeah, before we open the question sections, I want to highlight a bit about your presentation, because yeah, when we talk about this session, we have this discussion about how everything now is on digital collection, and how people can just reach out the digital library at ease by a click away now. But there's a loss. Yeah, there's a big gap.
There's
between
a lot of loss.
Yeah, there's a lot of loss, because you also joined the digitalization project before, and you touch every and each of the image. Now it's an image. Before it's like physical paper of photograph, or even a book of an album of photos. Yeah. So
yes.
The idea is to share about how loss is being, let's say, structured by the there's the idea of open access, but also there's a gap between how people can perceive now the information in the laptop and in your screen, and also you also underline that there's this personal touch of in example Dos Dekker with his own writings and everything. But in the meantime, there's this captioning process that's tends to be quite neutral, like descriptive and everything, because it's did by the staff or everyone that being long way after the photos or the album being made. So there's this big gap between the personal kind of biographical album, and how the archive institute like framing their collection. They cannot be that personal. Of course, they can only see the object afterwards, like maybe 70s or 80 years, even 100 years big gap gitu ya. So yeah, now we have this session to, let's say, debunk the image in your laptop is not enough. That's not everything.
No. It's
right?
A start. I always say it's a start. So it's what the thing is with digitization. So KTLV started digitization quite early, over 20 years ago. But at the time, it was still very expensive. So for example, in albums, we had to make selections. So not the whole album was being digitized. There was a selection of photographs being made. And when the scans were made, images were being cropped from the album page, so you can't see the captions. So there's a lot of, and for example, the cover, you couldn't see the cover. Whereas now, when we do digitization, what we tend to do is digitize the album cover to cover, so that you can actually see the whole object, and you can actually see how photographs are being glued on the page and what sort of captions, because it's something that people, for example, the Dos Dekker album is a very clear example. Because he paid so much attention to all sorts of details. So if we could go back maybe to, I think it's slide 2 or 3. There's so it's the captions, but it's also the way he does draw so he's drawn things on the pages. So there's a small notice, some musical notes on there. So it's and that's all sort of information that was lost. And for example, interestingly enough, this album page was completely not, these photographs were not being digitized because they were taken in Europe. And at the KTV at the time, we thought, okay, this is Europe, this is not Indonesia, so it's not interesting. Whereas people going on furlough, going to Europe for a year, there was something very European. It was a very European thing to do for colonial people. So it's a bit. it's a bit stupid that we didn't do it. So there's a lot of, and what I also find, size, you can't see the size. Of course, we give the size, the information is on the website. So it's in the metadata, but it's completely different when you feel an album, and also when you feel the weight of things. So for example, in the Royal Collections now, I'm working on an album which I couldn't get off the shelf by myself. So it's because it's so heavy. And you find them in every collection. Sometimes you have these very rich gifts to whoever, and they're huge and they're very big, but that's something that you don't sense when you looking at the image online. And also the weight, it will tell you how to deal with the album, because it means that if you, even at the time, if you wanted to have a look at the content, you had to put it on a table. There's no way you could just keep it in your hand. So it gives you a lot of information. And I also always find the tiger album, and you can actually see it on the cover. There's a few hairs being lost. It's a touch album because of the, and that's what everybody does who holds it in his hands. I always stroke the album, the cover, because it's and of course there's more people who have done that, but it's a touch object. So it's and that's something that of course you completely miss when you look at the stuff online. Although, you know, sharing online is a very good start, and it's a very because it's always also a way for people who are not able to come to the archives, to travel to the Netherlands, to get to view what's available. So it's very important, I think.
Ya, teman-teman, silakan kita bisa sudah mulai menyampaikan pertanyaan. Kalau misalnya ada pertanyaan, bisa melalui kolom chat atau bisa raise hand. Kalau mau bertanya langsung, silakan ditanyakan langsung. Kita bisa tanya langsung dengan Mbak Liesbeth di sini, yang memang terlibat langsung ya dengan proses digitalisasi itu apa. Mungkin bisa bertanya juga seperti itu. Jadi silakan ditanyakan, any question welcome. So waiting for question, I also want to underline one more thing. Liesbeth, you already mentioned about S. Nasruddin pocket book albums, which is, yeah, it's also about the social biography of that object, right? You know, how that small pocket book album is being, you know, being moved to one place and another, and you know, after it moved to one place to another, of course there's change in the narrative, and how people perceive the object. If I'm not mistaken, it's also in display on Rijksmuseum exhibition.
It was, it was displayed. Yeah, it was
on display. So it's like there's long, if you can talk about a bit about that, waiting for questions. You also underline it's not ethical to buy that, to bought that.
It's very unethical, and I was actually quite surprised at the time. And you know, actually, you know what? There's a sticker on the cover. It says "buitgemaakt," which means looted, mid-Java, and it says eigenaar geëxecuteerd, so owner executed. And the name of the captain who shot him is actually under it. So it's but that information was not shared online. So the information that was shared online is that it was bought from a dealer, and the dealer, it's a dealer who actually passed away earlier this year in The Hague, and well, that's the information that is given. And there was a small note being made in a field in the database, which the public couldn't see there. So there the information about the execution was. So the execution was being documented, but was not shared with the public. So and when I saw it in Revolutie, in the exhibition, I was very disappointed, so to say. I mean, I do understand that the people who made the exhibition wanted to show this album, and I also gave them the information about the album, so that's fine. But it was in a very big room. It was a huge room. And in the middle of this huge room was a very small showcase in which the album was being kept. There were no other objects. And at the back of the one of the walls, a few photographs were being shown on very large size. And I thought, this album is about intimacy. This whole room is not about intimacy. It's about, and I thought, I'm going to say this once. So with photographs, you can do just anything in an exhibition. You can crop a photograph, you can enlarge things if you don't use the original things. So what they did, they enlarged it. And I always say this is the pornographic side of use of photographs in an exhibition. And it's something that I don't really like, but it's something that museums do a lot. So, and it's always done to overwhelm the public. And I think, yeah, but this is a complete... the opposite of how the album was being used and what the album does. So yeah, I was a bit disappointed. So I think it was important that the album was shown in the exhibition. So it's also important. So the people who are now responsible for this album, it's important for them also to have a discussion about what to do with this sort of controversial album in your collection. So I think that's very important. And I think that's something that the exhibition also helped doing. But the way it was displayed, yeah, I didn't really like it. Yeah.
It says many things, yeah, how to present that. Yeah. And we all already have one question here, I think, from Firman. Yes, I will read his question. Hello, Liesbeth. Thank you for your presentation. My name is Firman from Indonesian National Student Movement, the student wing of Indonesia National Party. I have a question for you and a comment. My question is, what was the best and most proper method to conserve those old books and photo albums? And what kind of material are being used? And what kind of room, lights, etc. That KTLV used in order to keep their collection intact? And maybe also in the royal collection, yeah. And what was the best practice in digitizing this collection? Is it by camera or special scanner being used? And also there's a note. My comments are, you can also visit the link in the chat box. Liesbeth, visit this Dutchman blog, Moderator, treasurehunt.blogspot.com. He collect many cassettes, vinyl, and album from the past, especially Sudanese music cassettes and Indonesian rock and roll vinyl. He's waiting someone to digitalize or his massive abundance of collection. Thank you. Yes.
Oh, thank you. Oh, that's very interesting. I'll
Mas Firman, mungkin silakan if you want to also adding something or say hi to Liesbeth, please. Apakah mau langsung? Okay, later on.
Okay.
Maybe you can just answer first.
Okay. Yes. So I think we already talked a bit about the digitization. So what we do now is, for example, an album, we do it from cover to cover. So the complete object. When I have loose photographs, we digitize the front as well as the back, because there might be information at the back. Sometimes there's no information. There could be captions, there could be stamps of photographers, there could be all sorts of, also the paper that was being used, the Barita paper, for example, what sort of paper it was, which brand. So there's all sorts of information at the back of the photograph, even if there's no caption. And no information is sometimes also information, I find. And so that's something that we tend to do. So for loose photographs, the front and the back, and the album cover to cover. For scanning, yeah, it depends a bit. So at the library, we used to have a small digitization. We had a few colleagues who digitized the whole day. So we had a book scanner, which is quite a big scanner on which you can put the albums quite safely. Sometimes albums are difficult to digitize because you cannot open them fully. So then often a camera is being used, doing it page for page. It really depends a bit on the condition also of the album. And as for storing, that's also quite interesting. So at the KTLV, back in the old days, when I started there in 2002, so 20 years ago, for loose photographs, they were glued on a cardboard, which is of course, awful, and they were being put in drawers. And of course, when you glue photographs, loose photographs on a cardboard, the back, the information that is on the back of a photograph is lost, is completely lost. So, but of course, and later on we decided to do it differently, because we thought this is not the way to do it. And also, every time you get a cardboard out of the drawer, you will damage the image layer of the photograph. So that's also a very risky thing to do. So at one point we thought there's two options. What we can do for loose photographs, there's two systems. We can actually have them being put and not glued, but put in a passe-partout. But then, of course, you conserve a lot of cardboard, which is a lot of space, and it makes things heavier. And if you want to give photographs to people in the reading room, it's more difficult to handle them, because you don't want to have people touching the image layer of the photographs. So we decided then to buy a system which is acid-free boxes, so archival boxes with I don't know what it's called. It's ringband. Well, we had these sleeves made of Melinex, and Melinex is a safe polyester to put your photographs in. So we put those photographs in those sleeves, and they were put in boxes, so people could just flip through the box, which is actually quite easy. And for photo albums, we prefer to have them made, to have custom made boxes, acid-free boxes for them. So one photo album in one box. And if you have various boxes, it's also easier just to put them on a shelf together. That's also fine. So that's and for example, in the Royal collections, it's quite interesting. So there's been work done on conservation, but there's not a lot of money for conservation. So for the loose photographs, I said we really have to work on those, because they're now being stored not in a very good way. So we're now buying the system of the sleeves and the boxes. And for the albums, there's still a lot of albums that need specially made boxes. So interesting, and in the library, of course, yeah, there was way more money for conservation. And conservation is always, when I was still at KTLV, we were always interested in getting a lot of albums and a lot of photographic material. And if people would come up to donate stuff, because there's a lot of people also donating those family albums, for example, we would never say no, even though the space in the storage was not a lot of space. We didn't have there was not a lot of money for boxes and things like that. So that's, and I think as soon as you accept or buy something, you also have the responsibility to take very good care of the albums. And that was a bit lacking in KTLV in the beginning, but of course that also developed through time when the managers saw, okay, we really need to be more careful, because things will get lost if you don't do it properly. But that's always and yeah. And then you also talked about the lights and everything. So for exhibitions, and that's something that I had big fights over in the museum, in the National Museum of World Cultures. So for example, we did a refurbishment in the Tropenmuseum of the permanent exhibition. But the permanent exhibition will be there for about 10 years. And you cannot put an original photograph on display for 10 years. So there's different options. You can say, okay, we're going to rotate every now and then. But that, of course, that means that people need, it's time costly, and sometimes it's difficult to open certain cases and all that. So that's also difficult sometimes. So what I did there is we also used a lot of modern photographs by contemporary artists. And I asked the artist, would it be okay for you if we make an exhibition print, and then you tell me, of course, the process, and usually it's an inkjet print, you tell me the paper that you use, and I will, and we can do the printing here. And I also promise you, as long as those exhibition prints are being on display, the original the original photographs that we keep in the storage, we're not going to put those up in another exhibition because it's a unique work and we respect that. Well, and I had was in contact with an Australian photographer, and he was so kind, Michael Cook. Michael Cook said, I'm so glad that my photographs will be on display in the permanent display for 10 years. I'm going to send you a new set of prints. I will make them, and it's all, you know, I'm not asking you anything. So he was so happy that his work would be there. Whereas other photographers, so we also bought a lot of work for the exhibition. And there was a photographer, and I'm not going to mention her name. And I said, would you agree with this condition? Because I would really like to buy your work for this exhibition because it suits the theme so very, very well. But then she struggled with the exhibition prints and she thought, she was afraid that she wouldn't be in control of what happened to the prints. So she said no. And then we said, okay, then we're not going to buy your work. So it's always a bit of a struggle. Whereas I can talk for hours about this. Whereas in a photo museum, for example, they're so used, of course, for a specific process. Okay, this can only be up for 6 months. And we respect that. So they often do very short exhibitions. So the photo museum in Rotterdam, for example, which is a national photo museum here, they don't have a permanent exhibition. They don't, because they know how vulnerable the photographs are. Yeah. I'm not sure whether
yeah, 10 years, not 7 to 10 years. I heard the Tropen Museum exhibition is on until 7 years, is a long time for things to be shown. So yeah,
yes.
and Firman also add something in the chat box, and I think he wants to share with us this interesting fact. I don't know if you know him, Liesbeth. Hank Den Tum Jr., aka DJ Moderator, also bought dozens of photo albums from market sellers, albums that being looted from Dutch buildings from marketplace in Bandung, photos of APRA rebellion that shows Raymond Westerling's foot soldier along Braga in early 1950s. He have it. Photo of Andir Airport when delegates of Soviet Union visit Bandung. He have it. Photo of Karawitan musician and their dancers in 30s and 40s. He used to showcase his collection on his Facebook, but Zuckerberg's account. He still uses Instagram to showcase his collection. Visit his Instagram. So yeah, the legend Hank de Tum. Do you know him?
No, but I'm going to look him up. And I know,
yes,
for example,
please.
the photos of Westerling, some of those pictures, because we also had those in the KITLV collection, those were made by journalists. So I think there's also a difference between the personal things and the photographs that were actually intended to be made to be spread. So the photojournalistic photographs. But of course, I can imagine that people in Bandung also, when Westerling, when that was going on, people also made pictures themselves, of course. Yeah. But I'm going to look this up because it's quite interesting.
And also, I think before he asked about his word is he's waiting someone to digitalize or his massive abundance of collection. Yeah, this is the issue here. Like, how can you do that without like big budgets or institutional works, or how like big storage and everything if you have already big collection? But how to digitalize? Like, do you have any idea on that? Well, is there any like local effort?
Yeah, you can always do it with your own digital camera, of course, or with your phone. So I think, of course, yeah. So for the royal collections right now, there's no budget for digitization. So we do digitize ourselves, but I cannot send the albums away to an external party. And external parties do a way better job than I do. But it's just the way it is. So if there's no budget available, which I totally understand, I think you should just use your phone. And everybody, of course, has an HP that with a camera these days, and they don't make bad pictures, by the way. And it's maybe not a result you're hoping for, but at least it's a way in which you can share what on Insta, whatever, wherever you want to share. So yeah, I think that's how I would start. Yeah.
Of course, it's just the start, yeah, to digitalize everything.
Yeah.
But and then after that, how to make the information or the access is more comprehensive to people that access that. Of course, yeah. And there's also a question from Zali Armansyah. Hello, Liesbeth. How can you tell the difference or maneuvering between fact and fiction from those giant collection of photograph archives? Especially those archives have a material and tactile quality that can influence our perception and subjectivity.
So fact and fiction in the albums or fact and fiction? Yeah. So, oh, there is this very nice picture, which I don't think I can. No, I can't show you. I think I showed it to you, Theo. So what I always find, so for example, the Douwes Dekker album is an interesting example. So it's Douwes Dekker view on the War of Independence. So he's talking about the crazy Indonesians and all that sort of thing. So when for example we document those albums, we're not going to talk about crazy Indonesians, of course, because that's not. But there's all sorts of. It's always the view of people and how they perceive things and how they experience things. So I'm not going to judge about that. But what you do see sometimes is complete nonsense. So I know in the 19th century, when people didn't have a camera, and often they would buy photographs from professional photographers, photographs of landscapes, of temples, of town views, all sorts of things. And I'm not sure whether I showed it to you, Maste, when you were here. But there is this album, a travel album. So this European who traveled in Southeast Asia, he bought views and landscapes from various professional photographers. And there is a picture of a temple in Bangkok, and the caption says, "It's the Hindu temple, Borobudur." No, it doesn't. Yeah, it says it's the Hindu temple Borobudur. We know of course, Borobudur is not Hindu, it's Buddhist. And of course, the temple is not in mid-Java, it's in Thailand, which is quite interesting. So we know this person, he probably saw this picture when he bought those photos and thought, this is a nice picture, I'm just going to put it in my album. And so we also know this traveler didn't see the Borobudur, because there's a big difference between the appearance of Borobudur and this temple. So it's yeah. So talking about fiction, yeah, that's
Yeah, and I think if we can push a bit more, is the how the market or the commercial photography is shaping the perception of who's indie, the Netherlands indies, for people who never stood before the Borobudur, like it's shaped like this, not like that. Like of course it's like you can at that time one pictures can say a lot, of course, so you can make this illusion of this is Indonesia, or this is Indies, this is the heavenly world kind of. So in a way,
and also what I always think about is, so when you take a picture, and you still do it nowadays, when you take a picture, you frame something. So things are being kept out of the frame and things will be in the frame. Now, for example, there's a lot of albums and they were commissioned by, so there were administrators of plantations, and they would commission a photographer to make photographs of the plantation in Delhi, for example, tobacco plantation. And of course, we know that people, the plantation workers, the coolies, they did a hell of a job, and the circumstances were awful. But that's not something that's being in the picture. So what we see, for example, we see fields of tobacco, we see the housing of the coolies. We only see the outside and not the inside. So that's conscious choices. Of course, and the only message is we're such a modern plantation. We look well after our plantation workers, which is of course completely bull. So, but I'm very conscious of framing, and that's what you do when you take a picture. So that's also something to consider.
Yeah. It's funny because
Always.
I think after 100 years it still happened. Even I think I read about the Qatar World Cup is also done that, the beautiful stadium and everything, but low wage laborship, and it's no, you don't do that. It's awful about football and everything, because it's still the same. And we also have one more, I think we still have time. Yes. Question for Muhammad Akbar. Akbar, silakan if you want to turn on your camera and ask directly.
Hello. Hello, Mas Theo. Hello, Liesbeth.
Hello, bye.
So I have this, I have share thoughts. Maybe it can relate about the perceptions on how we view the photographs from the past. I mean, from the in this era. Like in the YouTube, you can see like the nostalgic video about Bandung jadul gitu ya, Bandung zaman dahulu gitu. Terus the old footage from the early cinema in Bandung. We can see the buildings and the architecture in Bandung, and also I really enjoying to strolling around the city and analyzing the architecture of the housing of the East Indies, or the post-war, like the janky housing. And sometimes I go inside and looking on the glass work, and on the windows. And when I saw this, how people in Indonesia perceive the image from the past, it gives like when you also when Elizabeth presents the memory album, also the albums is always showing the good life, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's always showing the good life, and also the collection for the Queen, also it's showing the paradise of Nusantara. And also I what I interest is how we as an Indonesian perceive the life of the Dutch people in Indonesia. And we saw like, it was the golden era. I think life is better there. It was better, it looks better, but we know that all the buildings, all the surroundings, all the environments is built only for one society. Yeah, I mean the colonizer, not the
colonized
people. The colonized. So I just want to share the thoughts about how we perceive the right now. Today we perceive the images from the past. I just want to share some thoughts.
Thank you. Yeah, and
Thank
it's
you,
actually
bye.
it's actually quite interesting. What I always, so sometimes with some databases, people can comment on the photographs. So people can say, for example, if you have a picture of Bandung, and people say, oh, this is a road where I live, and of course it looks completely different, and you get all sorts of comments on those. And quite interestingly enough, there's a lot of response from Indonesia, often when it comes to town views, so roads and houses and things like that, because and often it's very positive, whereas I'm also aware of the fact that there's also people putting up and that's fine, critical notes, but often they end up in, I think, on other media and not on the website I'm working on, which is very unfortunate. So it's you get different reactions, of course, to those things. But what we should always realize, of course, also for the personal albums, photography is such a class thing. So yes, there were Europeans who had a certain status, and Indo-Europeans, but also, as I showed you, Indonesians. But it's all high society. It's not the farmer or plantation worker or whatever. No, they didn't have access to this medium. So yeah, that's also something that we should always be aware of. It's a photography is a very class thing, and I think only very recently, since we all have telephones with cameras, it has become more democratic. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I also find that fact that we have this one restaurant in Braga called Braga Permai, and last week there's one international conference in ITB about the process of decolonization and everything, and then after that I brought the speakers let's eat have dinner in Braga Permai, and then they have this table mat that after 3 days of presentations and the critical thinkings about decolonization, and then they find this table mat that's saying that, yeah, this is the glory, the recipe from the golden era. I really like, if it sells, why not? that kind of feelings, I think it's also unique, and yeah, and I want to share with us, this is the house Dulce Domum that Liesbeth already shared in her presentation. We can find this building in Bahu Reksa now, Jalan Bahu Reksa. So yes, this is the existing building now for macadamia. It's like shops for kids stuff and everything. But yeah, it's not for living anymore. I think it's for shop now. But yeah,
business. Yeah,
it's still there. The Dulce Domum. I think the window glass is also still the vintage one, the same. I think, yeah, but totally different usage.
Yeah,
but
and it's also like the hotels that. So sometimes you have these nostalgic hotels, like the one in Surabaya. So it used to be Hotel Oranje back in the old days, and now it's
Borobudur. No. What's the ada yang hafal, the big hotel for the.
It's a big hotel, and it's and you know
flag, the blue flag, the blue.
Yeah.
Majapahit.
Yep. Majapahit.
Majapahit.
Yeah, but that's also there's also a lot of nostalgia in that building, and interestingly enough, I'm sure there's people being very critical about this sort of usage in Indonesia, and in the Netherlands, for example. So when we did a refurbishment in the Tropenmuseum, and it's about the colonial heritage, the past of the colonial heritage, actually here in the Netherlands, and we're being very critical about how we use those photographs and how we're going to, what sort of caption we're going to give those photographs in an exhibition, which is, so the whole nostalgia thing, yeah, it's been here like that as well, especially among a certain generation, which makes a lot of sense. But now people tend to be way more critical in how we're using those photographs. It's actually quite interesting. I should come to Bandung next time.
Yes, you should come.
Yeah, that would be
Please.
great. Yeah.
Make a trip here. Yeah, so if there are any other question, if we still have time, I think around 10 to 15 minutes, please ask anything, maybe from chat box or directly to Liesbeth. But waiting for that, I also want to push the discussion a bit more. Yeah. So what's this? What's this? What's after the digitalization of, maybe let's say, everything being digitized? And then what's the possible scenario? You said it in your journal in Wacana, the hidden narrative, and how the next generation of archivists needs to approach the archive differently in terms of the materiality and the information, not just as an image content, but also an object. Like, yeah, that's maybe the logical step, the next step. But what else? What do you think?
Oh, very good question. I'm only right now. I don't have an answer yet. So right now I'm working on a collection. So the Royal Collections in the Netherlands. I think less than 10% is being digitized and being cataloged. So it's a very small percentage of what's available. What we have is in our database. So right now I'm actually obsessed with how can we do as much digitization and documentation in our database ASAP, because I think less than 10% is totally unacceptable. And that's something that we're working on. So that doesn't answer your question at all. So I know, for example, in the university library, way more, I think maybe 90%, or in the Tropen Museum, 90% of the collection is available and is being digitized. And some things are being digitized again because they were digitized 20 years ago and we're not happy with the way it was. So what's new there? Well, actually, for people to use it, that's one of the. So for the Royal Collection, it's slightly different because that's a private collection. There's of course people coming over to do research, which with permission you get access, but because it's a private collection, it's different. So our goal is not to share everything with everybody, because it's a private collection. Whereas in the university library and in the museum, we wanted to share as much as possible with just anyone in the world, and we hope that people will use it, for example, in exhibitions, or use it in their research, or some people use it to do family research, for example. So either from Indonesia or from here. So I think that's one of the most important things. Or artists to respond on it, which is also great if people respond to the work. So like Zico did, we bought a very big painting by Zico, and he used, I think, 4 or 5 photographs from the Tropen Museum, and he used that in his work, which is great, actually. So
yeah,
you get
of course. Yeah, I think I also want to imply that, because the whole project of this extension course is based on that, actually, how the artistic approach to the archive, the photographic archive, is actually, of course, many more artists other than Zico also do this until now. So how that effort, the artistic effort, could open many new access to the past, of course. But I think I also personally, I also see that also like new problems open up, like how you perceive an artwork. That's not an archive anymore. Like that's a different game now. It's a painting now, or maybe it's an installation now. How do you engage with them? It's of course different and maybe more powerful. But maybe in terms of the Zaldi's question, how the fact and the fiction is already mingled. Which one is fact? Which one is fiction? Is like already, it's on just one power of artistic sensation. But yeah, and then of course we have to try to being balanced more about the research and about the the more fictional or the artistic intuitive process. And yeah, and then we'll see, because I think in Indonesia, of course, the history lesson in school is pretty much a closed door. Like, who can touch that? Even about the 96, the 65 event is still not being acknowledged yet. Even so, about the 1910, let's say, or 05, it's like a long way to go in terms of the school curricula. So it's more like this bottom-up effort from artists and writers. Writers also do many books, like maybe like fiction, but it's also from a fact, historical fact. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's we can see that maybe in next
and
5
I think
to
that's
10 years.
and I think it's exactly, and it's a very good thing. And people now can be critical. Of course, in the past people were critical as well, but sometimes they got a lot of comments and a lot of nasty comments. And of course, it doesn't say that you don't get those things anymore, but it's I think we've moved into a slightly different time zone, so to say. So and it's great that people are actually using this as an inspiration or to critique, or that's all fine. Which is, and what I really like, it's also like what you did, Theo, with the stickers that you've made. It always becomes more sort of a layered work, which I really, really like. So there's more stories in this piece of this, in this work, which I really, really enjoy, and which I think is very important. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, so do we still have question? Teman-teman, silakan. Apakah masih ada yang mau bertanya? Silakan raise hand. 5 more minutes, maybe.
Oh, and I'll put my email in chat as well for if people want to
your email.
send
Yes,
me an
please.
email.
Please contact to Liesbeth directly. She will be glad
please
to.
do.
Yeah, in contact with you. Yes, we have one more question from Hario. Thanks, Liesbeth, for your profound presentation, and thanks, Akbar, for opening the perspective of how we have to be critical in using of camera related to reciprocity between lens, beautifulness, and colonial way of developing an image. I also strongly believe that digitalizing the objects and make it accessible for the public related to material culture and ethical culture is an attempt in order to decolonize those kind of practice and research. And sure, it need a fund to do it, since we need to buy some low or high-tech tools. No, this is, I think, this is real. But I was curious, how if the fund for about 4 million that given by the Dutch government, how if the fund are cancelled? we cannot access it. But yes, what if? Maybe you can talk about that a little bit. You work in the Royal Collection, you know the funding from the government to do this. As I don't know, is there any like political agenda to why it should be out there in public access? Or and for Masario also. So what is the other way of decolonizing this kind of practice? And the layers of the simple, it's not simple, but I think the idea of digitize everything is pretty much everywhere now. But what if not? Is there any other way?
I'm not sure whether I get the question right. Can you reformulate?
Maybe we can ask Masario. Masario, if you can.
Is it about decolonizing digitization or about decolonizing the archive?
The archive, of course.
The archive, yeah. And I think then we should talk about what decolonizing actually means, because there's different meanings. People mean different things with decolonizing. It's a very important keyword, of course. So decolonizing can, for example, mean that you, and that's what we try to do in the Troop Museum, to view pictures differently, for example. So if I have a picture of Pakbewoner number 10, I can, of course, tell, we can talk about his position in a colonial context. But when we look at photographs, we can also talk about, oh shit, I forgot the word. Sorry, it will come up. Agency, it's there. So you can also talk about agency. And for example, in the exhibition, there's a picture of the Puputan, Badung, 1906. And there's a painting of a Balinese artist who made a picture of the who did the whole Puputan Badung 1906 in this painting, and we put those two together, and then we talk about the different perspectives, and the perspective of heroism in Bali, and the perspective of what we see here often about victims and perpetrators, which is, and I'm not sure whether those views will ever come together. But I think it's an important thing to do. So if you're talking about decolonizing in the sense of multi-voicedness, so that's how we tend to talk about it in the museum. Yes, I think that's a very important one. But I'm not sure whether that answers your question. So that also, when you look at a photograph, you can look at it in different ways. So for portraits, often we look for agency. And whether people were able to, for Pakbewoner, we know for sure that, of course, he decided how he would be, he was being portrayed. And he decided to send a picture to Queen Wilhelmina. And the way, so that's, I'm not sure whether that answers your question. So I think it's more, it's about the multi-voicedness of things. But maybe there's other ideas about decolonizing and different ideas about what decolonizing means. So,
or maybe if we don't digitalize everything, why? I think the idea of repatriation, maybe like if you don't put it online, why didn't the idea with the S.Sn photo book? Why don't you just give it back? Like the other potential, like, I'm not sure. We know, like, recently the Indonesian government sent this request on Eugene Dubois' Java School. Teman-teman maybe notice ya, ada museum di Sangiran. There's a museum in Sangiran, but holds no real school of Java man, because the real school is in the Netherlands.
In Leiden,
Leiden, so
it's next door from my place, by the way. So it's
say hi to the Java man. So the idea is the government of Indonesia asked the school back, because it was found in our land, like, but it's not the Indonesian that, what like.
But the response,
what do you think?
Response of the museum shocked me quite. It was a big shock. So on the list that the Indonesian government sent, there were also, there's objects from, for example, the Singosari statues. I know they're on the list, the ones that are being kept in Leiden, in the National Museum of World Cultures, where I used to work up till a month ago. And of course, the Dubois collection. And we had a big fight in the newspapers here. So Naturalis responded in a very defensive way. They said, but we're such an important international research institute, and people come here from all over the world, and we work together with Indonesians to view the Java man and also to view the Dubois collection. And we're the best institution, sort of, in a very short summary, we're the best institution to have the collection here. So, and they also said, but this is not art. And Dubois, he just stumbled upon the upon the bones, which is of course complete bullshit. But then in the same, so it was on the news here, on the national news, on television, in the same item, the director of Leiden was also being interviewed. And we said, and I'm going to say we because I was still working for the museum at the time, and I totally agree with the museum. He said, no, but we're so happy that the Indonesian government finally put a list and that the Singosari statues, among other things, are there. So they should be being repatriated. And the person, I mean, it's going to be a committee informed by the government, and they're going to make the final decision. But of course, the museum will totally advise that those Singosari statues will go back. And Naturalis just claim, but this is not art. But whether it's art or not art, or looted or not looted, it's not a question. It's about what these objects mean for Indonesia and what it means in an Indonesian context. That's what this is all about. And Naturalis didn't understand that. And I was so surprised because we had a lot of discussions here in the Netherlands over the past, well, years already. And I thought, Naturalis, where have you been? I don't know. Apparently they were, have you been asleep? What's going on? You didn't apparently, yeah. So I was shocked with their response. And after that, there were a lot of comments in newspapers, and people here were also shocked by the Naturalis response, which is a good thing. And the good thing is the committee will decide. It's not Naturalis who will decide what's going to happen to the Dubois collection. So I think it's a very positive thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. Let's see what the committee have say on this.
And the committee will be installed in December. So yeah. But in the museum, and you know, the director said, I hope they will ask for more. I mean, and you know, there's a lot of objects that are important, but I also know that in Indonesia they also said they're not going to ask the entire collection back. It's the things that are important and that will help. For example, the National Museum tell certain stories, and I think that's very important. Yeah.
Yeah, but maybe this is also at the end of our discussion. Is there any request regarding photograph or albums? Because this also underline which one is important, the statues or the photo album, right?
Interestingly enough, there is no, I don't think so. And I know, for example, the National Archives here in The Hague, they keep a collection of albums that were looted, and they don't make a secret out of it. So they were looted during the War of Independence, and they were used as intelligence also, for intelligence purposes. And it's actually stated on the website that those albums, soldier albums, were being looted, and no, there's no request. And often, and that's the thing with photography, often people don't see the difference between, I mean, I find there's a difference between the digital object and the original object for me, and reprint. But often, for example, I remember when I was still at KTLV, for example, with Puputan, there is an important Puputan album in the collection of the KTLV. For every 18th Puputan celebration, we would get requests from Bali, but for the digital things. So the digital thing is apparently just as important, or does the same thing. But of course, it all connects to the way how I see photographs. I see photographs as objects. So I'm not interested, actually, I'm not interested in reproductions. I don't care about those, which is, but there's other people who do care about reproductions, which is also fine. But for me, yeah, that's something completely different. It's incomparable. Whereas for other people, it's a substitute, and that's also fine. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's wrap our discussion here. Maybe for us who being here, maybe now we can also have a bit of glimpse, from Liesbeth. That's different. the images that we saw in digital, that's different from the real one. So if you want to see the real one, we still have to buy tickets to Leiden or to Amsterdam. We still have to bring ourselves, not the things, that object back to us. So I think that still also informs our position now in terms of how we perceive photograph as something that connects us to the past. But I think until now, to this day, the image will do. It's enough in a way. So, but I think we also have to keep in mind that there's this objects that before being digitized, there's objects, there's weight, there's textures, there's fur, there's tiger fur in the album. So and if that makes sense for us to see it online, you can imagine how it can blow our mind if we can have it in our hand and hold it and everything. So I think that's the conclusion of our discussion. Hopefully this can bring a new insight for us, because everything is being online now, so we know that as first reality, not like the reproduction kind of reality. So so thanks a lot, for everything.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
also thank you very much for the very nice questions and nice discussion. And it's so unfortunate that I can't see you in person. It would be great to see you all in person, but well, you never know what happens in the future. But please do contact me if you have any comments or questions or whatever. I mean, I'm always happy to talk about photography. And so thank you very much for the opportunity to share some of my thoughts with you. Thank you very much.
Ya, thank you Liesbeth, and thank you teman-teman ya. Terima kasih sudah datang. Ini adalah akhir dari sesi kita hari ini. Terima kasih banyak. Silakan mengisi link yang ada di kolom chat untuk absen. Sebelum kita bubar, saya ingin mengumumkan ada satu lagi pengumuman. Akan ada, minggu ini masih belum berakhir, jadi masih ada 2 sesi lagi dari ECIA. Hari Jumat besok ada melantingatan dari Sundea dan Yosefa Aulia, dan hari Sabtu juga ada Visible Invisible dari Audia Amalia. Jadi silakan dicek ke Instagramnya IA Unpar, akan bisa lihat di situ pengumumannya. Silakan mengikuti workshopnya, dan di minggu depan at the same day as ours today, like in Wednesday at 4, there will be talk from Jim Supangkat and at 23rd 23 ya. 23 November minggu depan. So kami akan share lagi linknya, mungkin kalau yang bisa datang silakan datang, tapi masih ditanya lagi ya, apakah Pak Jim bisa turun atau tidak karena COVID sedang naik. Jadi apakah bakal full online atau tidak akan kami kabarkan selanjutnya nanti melalui email. Silakan nanti bergabung lagi, nanti akan ada link yang dioper dari panitia. Sekali lagi terima kasih Liesbeth, thank you Liesbeth, dan teman-teman semua.
Thank you.
Sampai ketemu, see you
sampai ketemu lagi ya.
Next meeting or discussion. Terima kasih teman-teman. Dengan ini kami tutup ECIA bersama Liesbeth Ouwehand, Photograph as Object. Terima kasih dan selamat malam.
Selamat malam.
Bye-bye.
Bye.